Afternoon, everyone. My resting heart rate is normally 55. It's 101 right now. So I'm a little nervous to speak to so many of you, but thank you for being here on day 3 after a big lunch. It's going really well. Everything is completely fine. There was a spa in my hotel, so I had a swim and a sauna at 8 o'clock this morning. This is probably really more so what I mean by it's going well, though. So this is 35 years of population growth around the world. And in that time of a growth of 3 billion, we've halved extreme poverty. This is child mortality from the 1950s, 25% down to 6 in Africa. This is literally millions of children's lives. Since medieval times, when globally the rate was about 50 to 60%, we're now in the developed world down to about 1%. This is the cost of sequencing a full human genome, something that not that long ago we did at the cost of $100 million in something the size of a Tesco Extra, to now doing for about 100 quid in something the size of a desktop printer. That, by the way, is the key to truly personalized medicine. We're a more connected world than we've ever been before. This is internet use in the year 2000 and internet use today. But there's some inequity in that, which I'm sure you don't need me to pull out for you. And that sadly abounds. And the fact is, everything has not gone completely perfectly. For example, there was an extremely hungover set of Hindu participants in that spa this morning when I got there. So what was a relaxing time in a pool and sauna was very quickly disturbed. This is life expectancy by inequality. So born in Nigeria, you can expect to live 30 years less than somebody born in Japan. And that bears out in the UK as well. If you're a woman born and raised in Wokingham, you can expect to live 10 years longer than one born and raised in Blackpool. And my mother-in-law's born and lives in Wokingham. This is pretty famous now for anyone who hasn't seen it. This is Professor Ed Hawkins's climate stripes. That's 200 years of global temperature change. Each one is average temperature for that year relative to the average temperature from 1961 to 2010. So when you're exasperated by someone screaming that the world is burning while they're glued to a pavement, they're not entirely wrong. There's lots of frameworks for addressing grand global challenges. PwC made one called ADAPT. Every government has a risk register, which you can kind of conceive as another way of doing it. And the UN produced these are the Sustainable Development Goals. We're not doing very well for anyone who's been paying quite close attention to this. I'm not sure anyone would say that they tend to do well by focusing on 17 different things. It's not great as far as prioritization goes. And frankly, none of you in the room trust us to do it anyway. So if I call you not part of government and I call me part of government, less than half of you trust me to do anything anyway. So in this room, if we say that you all voted, which of course you might not have, and you were part of this poll, 47% of you 53% do not trust me to deliver anything. I think the Uzbeks have to say that they trust their government that much, but something's going all right in Norway. But in the developed world of liberal democracies, that is a fairly damning picture. So we're kind of left with this: the world is awful, it's on fire, it's unequal. It's much better than it ever was before. You live in the best time ever to be a human. You will live the longest, have the best access to healthcare, have the best access to education of any time in human history. And it can be so much better. There are still people dying of preventable diseases. There are still people suffering inequity. 1% still own 50% of the wealth. And the difficulty with this Venn diagram is it's all true all at once. And it's that fact and all of those complex global challenges that's the environment in which we seek to innovate public services. We seek to make things better than they were yesterday. So I'm Tony. John got some of it right. I've looked after strategy, innovation, a bunch of other things across the public sector. At the moment, I work in the NHS. I've been on the advisory board for a US company, Whoop, which make a very data-driven wearable. I led the shielding program through the first wave of COVID, and I worked at the Space Agency, and I wrote Innovation is Dead. And my shameless plug for the next 45 minutes is, please buy my book. It was told to me by somebody who used to be a teacher that when you're talking, you should start by saying, here's some of the things I'm going to say. So here are the things I'm going to say. Those are the grand challenges that I just set out. I realize that they're quite nebulous. But that's the operating context. And then I'm going to just talk through three things, which is why innovation probably isn't dead, but it's certainly on life support, that there are signs of life, and that we may well know what the treatment is going to be. And then I'll try and finish with why it's important, if you can stay with me that long. But before we start any of that, and if you're feeling a bit like, oh, okay, those were some big global data sets about big challenges, what does that mean to me? There's a bit here where we start by giving ourselves a break. If I take the 300,000 years of human history and condense it into 24 hours, which by the way is like 12,500 years an hour, we were in the last geological epoch for the first 23 hours. We're in the Pleistocene, before the last ice age. A species roaming the landscape, hunting, gathering, but certainly not living in any way we could recognize now. It takes until 2337 to get to anywhere where there's farming, urbanization in cities of any kind, and the first institutions. And everything that we take for granted or love, like the internet, cars, the pot noodle, nuclear weapons, the Tamagotchi, is all the result of the last 60 seconds. None of us in this room are evolved enough to cope with the world we live in or the grand challenges that it presents to us now. So if the next half an hour feels quite hard, that's okay, you're not evolved enough. And neither am I. And the best place to start as ever is probably with some kind of definition, so at least we're in a place where we have a shared understanding. I'd say there are other definitions available of innovation, but part of the problem with change of this kind at this moment is people are defining it incorrectly, and we'll come to that. This is the definition that's in my book. The key point I really want to make is that most of us go to the synonym of invention when we hear innovation. Oh, someone's invented something, that's innovative. And that is one half of the solution. The other half is that, and this is especially true in the public sector, what we need is to scale and spread innovation from where it's been proven and works to the places that still have the challenges it solved in the first place. And the two are frustratingly entirely different skill sets. And neither represents an innovation until the benefit is realized. Otherwise, and in the agency, we funded plenty of guys in Cambridgeshire in their shed with the next ramjet bit of technology. It's just an idea until we realize it. The other way to define innovation is all the things that it is not. And at the moment in the public sector, there's quite a lot of soul searching about how we go about some of the radical change we know we need to deliver, because all of you would look at the public sector and go, oh, not great. And you'd be right. So improvement, and this is where a lot of focus has been, this is the incremental optimization of something that we already do, right? 10 forms down into one, or an elite athlete getting 1% better every day. No one's looking at the NHS and thinking it just needs to get better by 1%. Transformation, point A where we are, point B where we know we need to be. We understand both states and all the paths in between. That's transformation. Audit is often more of a reason to change than it is a methodology itself, but in heavily regulated public services, this is a big part of what we do. Is if you are subject to inspection and there are recommendations from that, that's a big part of why you would go about any change. Research being the fundamental acquisition of new knowledge, and you see R&I functions quite a lot in different organizations and in the public sector. And the innovation in that R&I context usually really means commercialization. And then innovation, as we've discussed, is new value, different from what's come before, even if it's new to your context. This is how different mechanisms of change can play nicely together. This is a Kaiser Permanente graph. But you can see where you might be trundling along, improving what you do. Innovation leaps you to the worst, better place, which you can then optimize through something like improvement. And this really shows where I hope we will recognize we need to be and where we are now. I tried to have a think about what would be valuable for everyone here today. I'm obviously not a technical data specialist, and I won't pretend to be, because that would be very tragic very quickly. But I felt like probably what would be helpful is some measure of understanding about what the innovation ecosystem is like across the UK and across government. This is pretty old now. This is 10 years out of date. Nobody's bothered to try and make a new one for reasons which might be obvious. I mean, you can see there's a tiny box, medium-sized box in the top left, which is just all UK government departments, which is just 500,000 civil servants, no big deal, and budgets in the trillions. But this shows the complexity of trying to do radical change just in the UK alone. And the lines here, they imply connectivity, shared understanding. I assure you that does not exist. I have no idea why the lines are on the graph. This is just defense. And I'm really sorry I couldn't get a high-res one, so you can't really read much of what's on there unless you recognize the logos. But this is just defense trying to say, we recognize that we need to be a more innovative sector, be that in capabilities for security or whatever. And you can just see how complex it is to try and align. I mean, people are probably familiar with like the Shingo principles, right? Of like, we've got all this stuff pointing in different directions, and if we can line everyone up and go in the same direction, we'll get where we need to be. But it's almost impossible with that many sovereign organizations and boards. This is an assortment, but not an exhaustive list of the innovation white and green papers the government has produced just in my lifetime, which starts a little bit before 1993. But, they even let AI do the cover for this one, which I think is already quite regrettable. That's a lot of chop and change in policy direction, right? Okay, some of them aren't wholesale rethinks, but they are definitely a change and a tweak in what we're asking everyone to do. And this is the leadership of this work since 1998. So with the exception of Lord Sainsbury pulling a heroic 8-year stint at the beginning, the average tenure for a minister responsible for innovation in government is less than 18 months since 2006. And they were 85% men and 93% white. It's tough to get a consistent direction of travel with that much churn. I've worked for a few of those, and there's a bit in the middle there where their perspectives changed fairly radically, fairly quickly. But despite that turbulent picture of the landscape in which we operate, the policy shifts, the leadership shifts, we live in pretty prosperous times for innovation. If we take R&D as an analog, because an awful lot of the budgets that are partly distributed to innovation activity are also the broader budgets for R&D, then since 2013, 2014, this has been a pretty good time to be active in this space. It's been a pretty good time to go after funding from government to be more innovative. There's a few specific issues, though, keeping innovation on life support. First up is someone I'm dubbing the snobbovator. So, and this is a deeply ironic thing to deliver from the conference stage, but these are often people who go to conferences and stand up and go, innovation is mine, I'm the guy, look at all the work my organization or my sector are doing on innovation. And the reality is this person should be at the bottom of the hill, ushering people up, checking they've got enough water and the right footwear. This is in the spirit of write drunk and edit sober. When I made the slide, I thought it'd be really clear what it meant, and then I looked at it later and realized it, of course, wasn't. This is grant junkies. There are an alarming amount of organizations surviving off handouts from government. I'll bring it to life with a story. So my last job in the space agency was one of the least glamorous. I came back from negotiating the capabilities we needed to put a permanent human presence on Mars at the UN, and got straight back into a database project of how much money we'd spent on space technology development since the agency was formed, which at that time was 10 years. And we'd given out, just on technology development, £450 million, 80% of which we'd given to 8 companies. Now, a couple of them were pretty good at marketization, right? Ones you'd have heard of, TAS, Airbus, fine. But a couple of companies which I won't name, because I'm being recorded, right? It's a slight legal issue. A couple of them would just run the course of the grant, say they were going to commercialize the product, and then win the next grant. And this was going on for years. And the problem with that is kind of back to the definition of, it's not innovation until the benefit is realized. So this was a lot of unrealized benefit at extraordinary cost to the taxpayer. And it's really disheartening and disincentivizing for the organizations seeking money who are trying to be on a commercializing journey. And the third problem, which I think this audience will recognize better than most at the moment, is hype. You must be exhausted. The difficulty is that the money follows it. So, and again, you'll know because you're slightly living this world at the moment. This, never mind the subcategorizations, but obviously you can just see the radical increase in investment in AI over the past decade or so. The difficulty here is that the investment goes here and not in places where there is no hype, but there might be justified reason for us to invest public money. And so, kind of finally on the things that are keeping the innovation patient circling the drain are a few critical issues of culture, leadership, behavior failings, basically. So risk aversion in public services is almost always cloaked in a safety agenda, right? So the most innovative organizations, if we just accept the premise that the most innovative organizations are quite risk tolerant, you would find it hard to find a more risk averse place than decision making in my hospital. And some of that is for really good reason. Like, you don't want to turn up and find out it's that person's first day with that surgical robot. That would not be a great start to your surgical journey. But it has to happen sometime. And the problem is this clogs up radical change. You've also got a cadre of leaders who have spent a big chunk of their careers in public service delivery managing the risk in the thing that they do. And then when they step into a boardroom, what they're really good at is managing risk, not taking it on. Leaders in the public sector, more so than anywhere else as well, focus on the risks of action, not the risks of inaction. And it's a slightly trite example, right? But if you're the team principal of a Formula One team and you fail to innovate over the course of a season, you're probably going to lose your job, right? And your organization may cease to exist, and it certainly cease to be competitive. The perspective in a hospital or a prison or a regiment is quite different. And often but if we do that, this might happen, becomes the dominant zeitgeist of the conversation. And then finally, we've made so many layers of, like, this is the bit where if there's a Telegraph journalist in the room, I make their job really easy. We've created so many stifling layers of decision-making within the public sector. Like, if I want to do something new in my hospital, new process, whatever, I've got to go and get the specialty team to get on board, then the divisional team to get on board, then I've got to take it to the trust investment group to get quality feedback on my business case, which I've just spent 3 days writing. Then I've got to go and take it to probably 3 concurrent governance forums: clinical management board, trust management committee, people and culture committee. Then it's got to go to trust board if it's of a certain value. Then it's got to go to NHS England if it's strategically important enough. And the person gave up where you got bored in that sentence. That's why nothing happens. But there is hope. So if we move into like Act 2 of the things that are maybe not keeping innovation on life support, but are the signs of life that it may come back to us, we are starting to get a grip on the things that need to happen, even if we're not quite achieving them yet. So this was a pretty seminal paper for the health sector, which is called the Spread Challenge from the Health Foundation. And it was the first time that sector-wide, everyone bought into this notion of, actually, what we don't need is 100 new things being invented all over the NHS. What we don't need is to foster inventors all over our 250 acute hospitals. We need to see the one where something is working and spread it to the other 249. And believe it or not, that was tremendously radical thinking for that group of leaders to accept in 2018 when this came out. We also know what the perfect teams look like. And I think to some extent you will, in your world, you might recognize some of the skill sets and behaviors I'm going to talk about here for what you do. But certainly in terms of public sector innovation, we know that we need the policy professionals and the engineers who are some of the best problem solvers out there. We know that we need grant funding experts who can go and get the money, that we need designers and ethnographers who understand how people are going to interact with something. And then you need a suite of behaviors in the innovation space that are not, again, I don't think particularly surprising. You need people who can think disruptively. You need completer finishers who are just obsessed with getting it done. You need detail people. You need feelers who are not just, structured and focused on the outcome, but understand how it's going to be interacted with. And you need a few inspiring leaders who are going to be able to sell innovation solutions in a space where no one's interested. John asked me to think about this when we had like a pre-meet. And it's one of the hardest questions. I'm kind of hoping that it was, we might not be doing questions at the end, but I'm kind of hoping to head off this is the hardest question now in case it was coming, which is, why are some sectors more innovative than others? And writ large, we might think of that as like the public sector, the private sector, but it's truer beneath them as well and within them. So there are more innovative government departments than others. There are more innovative bits of the private sector than others. And it kind of broadly stratifies into these five reasons. God, I'm just realizing how boring black and white slides are as well. So, like I mentioned earlier about the risk, the risk point on inaction and action, the innovative sectors see inaction as a bigger risk than action. So I once very specifically led innovation activity for a part of the NHS, and when leaner times came, the budget went to zero. Pharmaceutical companies, private providers, different bits of other sectors in the same economic context tripled or even quadrupled their innovation budgets because they recognized that the only way out of the status quo was the radical new. And look at us now. Look at 7 million people on a wait list. Statistically, like almost all of you will know someone on a wait list. Leadership consequence. Now this is horrible. This is like not a place where we want to be. Like I've been a branch secretary of a union, right? So this is kind of hard to talk about for me, but job losses drive innovation. If you're the chief exec of Tesco or that Formula One team, whatever, and you fail to do the thing that you need to do, you fail to deliver the change that needs to be delivered, your job is probably going to be gone. And that's like really uncomfortable and unpleasant, but it is simply not the context in which public sector leaders find themselves. If our chief exec doesn't deliver on the key wait times the government sets out, the worst thing that will happen to her is a sideways move. She will not be sacked. It's the same if you're the governor of a prison. It's the same if you're a general in the military. The failure culture is also pretty tremendously different between public and private sectors. Gareth Rhys-Williams, who until recently was the chief commercial officer of the civil service, stood up at a conference of his peers, which was a fairly brave thing to do, and said to them, you all need to get comfortable with 90% failure rate. Because in the civil service, if you try something and fail, you become the person who tried something and failed, and you're not allowed to try other things. Out there in the most innovative bits of the private sector, and now fortunately more bits of the public sector, we tolerate 9 out of 10 things going wrong. And okay, Thomas Edison didn't invent the light bulb, right? But he still said that I didn't fail 1,000 times, I found 1,000 ways not to do it. We have to tolerate a much greater culture of failure than we do now. I kind of mentioned the governance aspects of structural agility, but the budgetary cycle is another problem. So again, you might, depending on which bits of public sector some of you work with, you might recognize what I'm about to say. But at best, you'll get a parliamentary or spending review life cycle of a certainty over what's going to be funded. What's much more normal are annual budgetary cycles, and then what happens an awful lot with digital solutions in the NHS and other public sector organisations is, oh, it's February and I need to spend some money by the end of March. This is not the kind of structures we need to foster good innovation. And then finally, and again, this is like it depends a little bit on your politics as to how much you buy into this as well, but market forces and competition do in some contexts create innovation necessity. So it didn't work with railways, it didn't work when we started pitting hospitals against each other, but it probably has worked in the smartphone market and the automobile market. I'm not going to read this out to you. Have a read for yourself. This is from a guy called Tobias Stone. And this is kind of where we need to adopt stuff from other places bit comes to life, because that's really hard. So I identify a problem in a particular context. Oh, there's too many people in my prison. What do I do about it? If I had the solution, I probably would have done it, but it doesn't mean that I know where to go and look. So we're kind of in this place where we understand the benefits innovation can bring, and we understand that it might be a solution to our challenges, but not everyone is completely comfortable in even knowing where to go and look for the solutions. What I wanted to do is give a few examples of, and they're by no means perfect examples, a few examples of where the public sector has had a crack at innovating. This is one I was involved in a few years ago called the Future Hospitals Initiative. We've got 5 million quid out of the Space Agency to go and ask the space sector, what of your skill and capability can you bring to the design and delivery of a new hospital and its services? Right, and we expected silence, nothing, because they make rockets and satellites. But what we got, well, I'll share 2 of the ideas, which were full-on world firsts. And they demonstrate perfectly the inventive side of innovation as well as the adoption side, right? Because here we were potentially taking something from a completely different context into ours. The first was a company in Southampton in cahoots with the university saying, actually, the plasma from the thrusters on this spacecraft, I can make an air filter for the hospital out of those. And that sounds really boring, right? Like really boring. But if I tell you that the most people who died in hospitals in the pandemic were the facility staff who were changing filters like that because we didn't have a vaccine yet. And these things would never need to be changed, and they would kill rather than collect all pathogens on contact. The other one we got, and stay with me because this is like one of the most complex sentences I ever have to construct. So it's a space company, and they were able to take space data, so topographic data, air quality data, thermal imaging data, and then terrestrial data sets, green space, blue space, public health data sets on smoking rates, vaccine rates, obesity rates, and broader ONS data like general income, housing quality, whatever. Crunch it all in a proprietary black box, which obviously none of us were allowed to see, and then spit out a geospatial risk mapping tool for health inequalities, so that you could go into these particular streets where you knew you were going to have a problem down the line and start deploying social or health interventions then. So we talk about a left shift a lot in the health zeitgeist at the moment of like, we need to intervene further upstream, go and pull people out, go and intervene upstream rather than pull people out downstream. That's where we're heading. And these are the kind of data-driven tools that other sectors, they just knew how to do that, right? This wasn't complex for them. They had the capability. No one in health even thought that was possible. This is a great example of adopting something that's just kind of out there into your context. So anyone who's worked with the space sector, even tangentially over the last 20 years, will realize that there was a fairly big revolution in the early noughties for something called commercial off-the-shelf, or COTS. So Surrey Satellite Technologies, now part of Airbus, used to make, obviously like all other manufacturers, bespoke missions based on what you need. And at a point, they started to realize, okay, someone's ordering 100, 150, 200 satellites because constellations were becoming a thing, low Earth orbit was becoming a thing. And so they thought, oh, actually, do you know what? We could probably use that rad shielding that the defense industry use, or those batteries for that thing over there work in harsh environments. Let's just use those. And they made their offer radically cheaper by no longer providing bespoke solutions to every mission, but by taking what had come from somewhere else, essentially, buying it at a much lower cost, and deploying it into their, and that made them cheaper, right? So it helped them be competitive in the market, but it also provided access to space for a whole raft of people who didn't have it before because of the price point. So academia, for instance, has had much greater access to space for the last 25 years. And then this is kind of like a social innovation that's waiting for someone to pick it up and run, but we're too busy calling it utopian rubbish. In 1976, Alaska established, I think legally it is called the Permanent Fund, but it's called the Citizen Dividend in a lot of places where you read about it. And it's not great because it's from the oil revenue thing, and we should all be a bit more conscious about where we're getting our energy, right? But essentially, a portion of the oil profits in Alaska are distributed to Alaskan citizens. And 3 years ago, it was just over $3,000. Now, that doesn't eliminate poverty, but it alleviates the absolute worst of it, the most acute bits of it. And actually, most people in the kind of middle classes are using that to supplement education. They're using it to try out starting a small business. It's adding a lot of factors that we would consider to be growth now. But if you go into, I mean, some of you might even had a bit of a reaction when someone says things like citizen basic income. You think, oh no, get a job. Like people have quite an emotional reaction to that kind of thing. But this is potentially a big part of our future. So if we're done with like what's keeping innovation and life support, and then what's maybe keeping it alive, giving us a bit of hope, the final part is probably the treatment we're going to dole out, right? Like how are we going to actually make this kind of stuff start happening? And I had lunch. So when I wrote my book, like I wanted to interview a bunch of people because I don't know everything. Astonishing, I know. This guy was desperately wanting to be interviewed for the book, which was really weird. His name was Ian Annett, and he was the, I didn't interview him for the book, but we did have lunch. We had like a spiced chickpea soup in this art gallery in Salisbury. And we kind of spent a bit of time arguing about, is innovation like a team you set up somewhere? Or is it everyone's business? And I think this probably, like as an argument, isn't resolved yet. But there's a nice future where we might imagine that in the same way that everyone has like a little bit of project skills, or we can send everyone on the Prince 2 course, everyone kind of understands it and speaks the language. If we can get there with innovation, we unlock the people doing it in organizations will find that their audience is much more understanding. The other bit is innovation cycles are pretty popular. This wasn't a masterclass or anything. I didn't want to bother with this talk doing like, here's how you do innovation. But what's interesting about this is more organizations now understand number 6 on here and are doing it more regularly. So you'll all recognize, like, find out what the problem is, look at what impact you can have if you solve it, go and see what opportunities exist and who can help you find them. Loads of rapid cycle testing, get it wrong loads of times, dummy run it, whatever. Evaluate the impact. That's where a lot of people were stopping. Like even if you found those first 5 in a public sector organization 5 years ago, you're doing pretty well. No one was going on to then talk about and actively themselves try and scale and spread it. It was always a pull factor. I had to go and look at the thing I want to scale into my context. Now we're getting to a place where people are going out and saying, I solved this challenge with this thing. Here's how you can maybe adopt it. And there's more vehicles by which people can do that as well. We've also got places to go and do this, which we didn't have before. Now, I'm fairly certain I'm speaking to an audience that understands the need to test things in dummy environments. That's probably a big part of your world. But that wasn't the case for trying stuff in some public services. Think about how difficult it is to try an innovative model for prisoner transport in a live context. That's fraught with danger. The same for a new bit of clinical practice or a digital system in a clinical setting. Places like the Satellite Applications Catapult and other bits of the Catapult network started setting up living labs. So you could go and access a 5G ambulance, a dummy GP room, a hospital bed, and run the thing you want to do in a dummy environment, a cold environment, out of patient contact, solve it, and then deploy it in a hot setting. We've also got some frameworks that are starting to be adopted more widely. So I used to speak at events or go to events that were innovation tangential, and people would come up to you and say, "Oh, have you heard about this thing?" And it would always be this approach to innovation or this resource for finding innovation in their organization. No one was ever coming and telling me, that organization over there has this really cool tool and now I'm using it. But that's kind of where we're getting to. So UNICEF have released this thing called the 5D Innovation Framework, which basically is an enormous collection of the challenges and solutions that education has deployed all over the developing world. And it'll help you find the innovation you need. It'll help you work out if your business model is structured right or your organizational model, the impact it can have, how scalable it is, the risk of doing it. And another one that's really good, and you guys might be interested in this depending on whether or not you are developing a solution you think you should be or could be selling into the public sector. It used to be called the Knowledge Transfer Network. It's now called Innovate Business Connect. And this again is this pan-sector cluster of people who are understanding what lots of challenges are and lots of solutions are that aren't related to one another and trying their best to join the dots. There's also, oh my God, who's involved in standards? Who knows stuff about international standards? Oh yeah, okay, John. I mean, it is dull, right, as a world. But there's the International Standards Organization now has the 56,000 family, as if the word family makes it exciting and nice. But it is really cool because in the public sector, we have lots of operational management systems, lots of ways of running organizations. We get really obsessed with how we cascade our strategies from board to ward and what it means at every layer of the organization. And almost all of those methodologies are either based on some kind of really operational process or an improvement process. The standards now establish innovation management practice, setting your organization up to be innovative by a way of leading it. Mission Economy is a book by Mariana Mazzucato. If you ever wondered why a government got elected and then suddenly all you started hearing about was missions, it's because Keir Starmer read that book, swallowed it, and arrived at his 5 missions. And he actually got it wrong, if you read the book. It's kind of funny. But what it is a framework for doing government via innovation. Loads of cross-sector innovation, looking at, so you might take something like clean oceans as your innovation mission, and then it's all the cross-sector innovation that might be needed to achieve that. And then Innovation Accounting is a book by Dan Thoma and Esther Gons, who I think are both Dutch. I've read it 3 times and still don't completely understand it. But financially literate people tell me it's a pretty important milestone because it says you need to set your organization up to financially account for innovation, to reward the pursuit of it, and then be able to reflect it in your balance sheet. This slide I will read. So we've got some pretty good stuff to look back on. This is from a book called Radical Help by Hilary Cottam. On a cold and wet November night in 1942, Londoners formed a queue. Huddled under umbrellas in a line that stretched around a block of government offices, they waited to see a report that civil servants had at first tried to suppress and then to amend. The publication of this report marked the beginning of one of the biggest social transformations the world had ever seen. The report, with its pale blue covers and cumbersome official title, Social Insurance and Allied Services, was known from the outset as the Beveridge Report, after William Beveridge. It was a technical blueprint for the modern welfare state. He set out plans for a free national health service, policies for full employment, family allowances, and the abolition of poverty through a comprehensive system of social insurance. The new welfare service was for everyone, and it would be universal in scope. And it is the biggest social innovation of the last century. And it would never happen today. People hated it at the time as well. So if you come out of this and someone's like, oh, okay, what did the slightly irrelevant guy tell you about innovation on the third day of the conference when you were exhausted? Let it be this. We need to spread what we have as much as invent the new. Like, let that be the message on innovation that everyone takes out. I need an answer to getting people into ED through their admission and treatment they need, out into the community and social care. I need that to be better, and so do you if you're on a wait list, much more than I need the next crystalline drug grown in microgravity, which someone is working on. And I need the skills to do that, and the teams in my context need the skills to do that. And that's the same in prisons, that's the same in the military, that's the same in education. And more critically than all perhaps of any of that is we need the permission to fail. And part of that's like your tolerance as taxpayers. You need to give us all your money and then let us fail with it. In 2014, I'm nearly done, I promise. In 2014, a British artist and a Norwegian library started asking one author a year to submit something to the future library. No one was allowed to read it. They planted a forest of trees, I think just outside Oslo, I'm not sure where. And this will carry on for 100 years. And in the year 2114, the trees will be cut down and all the secret works printed. So I read about it a few years ago, and then it was on the radio a couple of weeks ago on the Today program, if anyone was listening. And as I've been thinking about this talk, it's been like rattling around in my brain, like I need to put that in on a slide. And they'd be like, why? That's completely irrelevant. No one's going to care about that. So it took me a while to work out why, but it's basically this. Innovation's really hard, right? And in the annals of human history and those epoch-long timescales we talked about at the beginning, big radical stuff. We talk about it in the graph I show where it's the big uptick. We kind of think about radical change as instant, right? Like I'm going to innovate and then boom, it's done. And now I can optimize with my improvement. But often it's not. Like the big changes actually still take a fair chunk of time. And it might be that it takes a bit longer than your career or your lifetime. So what these artists are doing for the sake of posterity and intellectual interest is kind of what we need to bring into the professional world, which is we probably need to do a little bit more of planting trees in the shade of which we will never sit. And very lastly, why? So like, take out your phone, all right? Don't unlock it, just look at the lock screen. Mine's my kids. Most of you will have someone you love on there, a dog, a cat, a parent, a sibling, nephew, niece, children, whatever. Innovation, like it can be a professional interest, it can be an intellectual pursuit if you want it to be. But the reality is for the people on the background of your phone, there's some sniggering going on, which leads me to believe some people probably got their car or something. Innovation is going to be the method by which we leave behind the world that we owe the people in the picture, the children and the grandchildren. It's a bit trite, but it is true. They are the people for whom you should plant the trees in the shade of which you won't sit, because they probably will. Thank you. Buy my book.